Let's take a closer look at augmented and diminished intervals. So we already know that if I have a major interval and I make it smaller, it becomes a minor interval. If I have a minor interval and I make it bigger, it becomes a major interval. If I make it bigger still, it becomes an augmented interval. Or if I make a minor interval even smaller, it becomes a diminished interval. The same is true with perfect intervals. If I make them larger, they become augmented, and if I make them smaller, they become diminished. Intervals are either in this group, these are my seconds, sixth, that's what I'm going to say, or seventh intervals, and these are my first, fourth, fifth, and eighth intervals. So just keep that in mind. Now here we have some intervals that I've already analyzed for us, but we're going to make changes to them. We're going to change them from what they are into another type of interval. In this case, f to c is a perfect fifth. If I raise the bottom note, I raise f to f sharp, I've now decreased the size of the interval. And a perfect interval that gets smaller changes into a diminished fifth. Notice that because we're still talking f to c, it's still 5 letters apart, so it's still a fifth, it's just a smaller version of the fifth. If, instead of decreasing it, I raise the top note, or I could have lowered the bottom note, made it larger, now I have something bigger than a perfect fifth, I have an augmented fifth. Up next, we have a perfect fourth, and if I increased the perfect fourth, in this case I lowered the bottom note to increase the size of the interval, I don't have a perfect fourth anymore, I have an augmented fourth. If I decrease the interval, now I've gone smaller than a perfect interval, so I have a diminished fourth. And some of these intervals will sound like another more common interval, a major or minor interval with a different number, but they're written as this way, and so we should analyze them this way. Here we have a perfect octave, C to C, but what if I flatted the top note? That would take the perfect octave and make it smaller. In this case, it would be a diminished octave. Or I could instead make the interval even larger, and that would make it an augmented octave. Up next here we have A to C sharp, which is a major third. But what if I took that sharp away? That major third would become a minor third because it got smaller. And what if I continued to lower it? In this case, I flatted the bottom note, it would become, or flatted the top note, it would become a diminished third. Let's go back to where we were a second ago with C sharp. Now we have A to C sharp. Now this is our major third. If I do A flat to C sharp in this case, I've made it even larger, so my major third becomes an augmented third. Now over here, we have a minor sixth from F to D flat. So for our minor sixth, if we get even smaller, so in this case, F sharp, now I've taken it and I've made it a diminished sixth. Alternatively, I could make it even larger. If I took that flat away, I would get a major sixth. And if I, let's say, sharped this note here, I would have even larger than a major sixth. I would have an augmented sixth. And finally, we have E to D, which is a minor seventh. So E to D is a minor seventh. If I were to flat that top note, I'm making it smaller, so my minor seventh becomes a diminished seventh. Or if I were to flat my bottom note, then I would get my minor seventh would turn into a major seventh. Or if I were to double flat my bottom note, my major seventh would turn into an augmented seventh. So any of these intervals can be changed to be a different type of interval with the addition or subtraction of accidentals. They're still going to work within either this grouping or this grouping, and those are tied to the number, to the letters. So seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths can only be augmented, major, minor, or diminished, and firsts, fourths, fifths, and eighths can only be augmented, perfect, or diminished.